the beginning of a dream. John Tyler stood at the edge of his small town, staring out over the vast expanse of farmland that stretched for miles. The wind rustled through the trees, and the distant hum of tractors filled the silence. It was a peaceful place, but to John, it felt like a cage, a beautiful cage, but a cage nonetheless. He had lived here all his life, and while the town held memories of comfort and family, it also represented everything he wanted to escape. His father, a mechanic, worked long hours in a dusty garage, fixing everything from broken-down cars to farm equipment. His mother, a schoolteacher, spent her days shaping the minds of children who, like John, often dreamed of something beyond the rolling fields. But no matter how hard his parents worked, the town's limits were undeniable. Dreams of something more often felt like illusions, fading as quickly as they appeared. John had always been different. From a young age, he devoured books and listened to stories of far-off places, of people who had built empires from nothing. He wasn't content to follow the path of his father or his neighbors. He wanted more, a life where he could make a real difference, a life that reached beyond the quiet corners of the world he knew. But dreams were complicated. They were messy. They were expensive. Every day, John worked at the local diner, clearing tables and washing dishes, the clink of silverware punctuating the rhythm of his thoughts. His shifts were long, but the pay was meager. In the back of his mind, a single thought echoed, "I'm meant for something bigger." He had always believed that there was more for him out there, a career, a purpose, something that would allow him to break free from the small town that had defined him. But with each passing day, that belief was challenged. His friends had long ago accepted the reality of their situation, content with their jobs at the local factory, or joining the army when they turned 18. John had tried to convince them that there was more out there, but their skepticism often made him question his own convictions. His father's words echoed in his ears as he sat in the dim light of his room that evening. "Not everyone is meant to leave this place, son," his father had said one night over dinner. "Some of us are just meant to stay and build here." But John wasn't so sure. The idea of staying felt like resignation. He didn't want to settle for a life dictated by the town's invisible boundaries. The thought of waking up every day in the same place, doing the same work, for the rest of his life, it suffocated him. John stood up and walked to the window, his gaze drifting over the farmlands. He didn't know how he would do it or where he would go, but he was certain of one thing. He wasn't going to let this town define him. The dream had taken root long ago, and now it was growing unstoppable. He was determined to chase it, no matter the cost. The first step had to come soon. The struggle. John's feet hit the pavement as he walked through the town center, the soles of his worn shoes slapping against the cracked concrete. The streets were quiet now, the hustle of the day gone. He had just finished his shift at the diner, but his mind was still racing, consumed by a singular thought: escape. He had spent the past few months applying to universities, sending out every application he could find, hoping for a chance at something bigger. But with each rejection letter that arrived, his resolve began to crack. The dream he had nurtured for so long was starting to feel impossible. Maybe his father had been right. Maybe not everyone was meant to leave. John's mother, ever the optimist, tried to console him. "It's just the beginning, John," she would say, her voice warm but uncertain. "You'll find a way." But even her comforting words didn't stop the nagging doubt that crept into his mind each time another no came in the mail. He wasn't sure how much longer he could hold on to the dream when it felt so far out of reach. It wasn't just the rejections that wore him down, it was the constant pressure to stay. His friends, well-meaning but practical, didn't understand. "Why leave?" they asked. "You've got a good life here. You could work at the factory, make steady money." It was hard to explain to them that steady money wasn't what he wanted. He wanted a life that meant something bigger than the small town's limits. One evening, after another rejection email from a university, John stood in front of the diner's back door, staring into the empty street. His hands trembled, a mixture of frustration and hopelessness gnawing at his insides. He could hear the laughter of his friends down the block, their carefree voices drifting in the night air. They were celebrating something small, but they were happy. He couldn't help but envy their ability to be content. "John, you okay?" A voice broke his thoughts. It was Rachel, one of his coworkers, who had seen him standing there for a while. She was a year older than him, someone who had always been kind to him, even though she seemed to have accepted the life she had in this town. "I'm fine," he muttered, but Rachel saw through the mask. She had seen the same hunger in his eyes before, the same hunger that had burned in her own eyes when she was his age. "You know, it's not easy," she said, stepping closer. "Leaving, I mean. I wanted to leave, too. But sometimes, things don't work out the way you expect." John swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking deep. It was true. Things weren't working out. And maybe, just maybe, he wasn't cut out for something bigger. Maybe this was all just a dream, and he needed to wake up before it consumed him completely. As he walked home that night, his thoughts were a whirlwind. The world outside the town still seemed so far away, and he didn't know if he could keep pushing forward. But deep down, he knew that if he gave up now, he would never forgive himself. The struggle was just beginning, but the question was, how long could he endure before the dream finally slipped through his fingers? The awakening. The following weeks blurred together, each day feeling like a repeat of the last, shifts at the diner, hours of scraping by with little more than a thin thread of hope to hold on to. John had been waiting for something, anything, to shift in his favor. Yet each rejection felt heavier than the last, his frustration mounting with every polite refusal. The dream he had held so tightly seemed more and more like a cruel joke. The weight of the town, the pressure from his friends and family to settle, was suffocating him. But then, one evening, something changed. It wasn't a big event, just a fleeting moment that would later feel like the pivotal turning point of his journey. John had been at the local library, sifting through old books about business and innovation, trying to gather any scrap of knowledge that might give him an edge. His eyes had scanned the pages mindlessly when he felt a tap on his shoulder. "John, you still thinking about that university thing?" Rachel's voice broke his concentration. She stood behind him, arms crossed, her brow furrowed with concern. "I don't know any more," he said, his voice thick with frustration. "It feels pointless. The more I try, the further it slips away. Maybe I'm just not meant for that life." Rachel studied him for a moment, her eyes narrowing. "You're giving up too, easily." John turned to face her, incredulous. "It's not about giving up. It's about facing reality. I'm not going to get into those places. I don't even know what I'm doing half the time. I'm just stuck." Rachel's face softened, and she stepped closer. "You think you're stuck because it hasn't happened yet. But it's not about waiting for someone to hand you an opportunity. You have to make your own way. If you want something bigger, you have to fight for it. And you won't do it by sitting around waiting for something to change." John stared at her, something clicking in his mind. It wasn't the first time someone had told him to fight for what he wanted, but it was the first time he had really heard it. He realized then that he wasn't stuck because of the world around him. He was stuck because he had been waiting for a perfect moment that might never come. He had been waiting for validation when, in truth, all he needed was to act. That night, John went home and sat at his desk, the soft glow of his lamp casting long shadows across the room. He opened his laptop, fingers hovering over the keys. He began to draft a new plan, one that didn't rely on universities or external validation. It was a plan that began with small steps, with actions he could control, rather than waiting for someone to give him permission to dream. He clicked the Submit button on his application for a business course, one that was affordable and practical, not prestigious or out of reach. It wasn't the path he had imagined, but it was a start. The next day, John felt a strange calm. He didn't know if this would lead to his big break, but for the first time in months, he felt like he was moving forward, not just spinning in place. He wasn't waiting for a sign anymore, he was making his own. The road ahead was unclear, but John was ready to walk it, step by step. The transformation. Months had passed since John had made his decision to stop waiting. He had enrolled in the business course, a humble beginning to the path he had once thought impossible. Each day felt like a battle, but one he was now willing to fight. He spent late nights reading textbooks, attending online lectures, and absorbing every piece of knowledge he could. At first, it felt overwhelming, but with time, something shifted. The more he learned, the more confident he became. The small town was still a heavy presence in his life, a constant reminder of where he had come from. But the town no longer defined him. He didn't see it as a cage anymore. It was simply a place, a starting point. His ambition had outgrown its borders, and with each new day, He felt more capable of achieving the life he had once only dreamed of. One afternoon, as he was working through a particularly challenging assignment, John received an unexpected call. It was from an entrepreneur he had met briefly during an online networking event, someone who had been intrigued by his passion for business despite his small-town roots. The entrepreneur wanted to talk further. The conversation was brief, but it left John with a feeling he hadn't had in a long time: hope. Weeks later, he was offered an internship with a startup in the city, nothing glamorous but a start. It was a chance to learn from people who had walked the path he wanted to follow. As he boarded the bus for the city, his heart raced with excitement and fear in equal measure. The familiar sights of a town faded behind him, replaced by the bustling energy of a world he had only seen in books and on screens. The work was harder than anything John had ever experienced. There were days when he wanted to quit, when the doubt returned, telling him he wasn't cut out for this. But something in him refused to give in. He had already come so far. The idea of returning to the life he once thought he was trapped in felt like a step backward. One evening, after a particularly long day at the office, John sat on a bench outside the building, watching the city's lights flicker in the distance. He thought of a small town, of the people there who had always believed he would stay. He had once